Hi, Cody. Welcome to this Therapist Spotlight for Therapist Corner. It's lovely to have you here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited about this.
Fantastic. Can you start by telling us? I'm fascinated by America. I have been a few times, and I think it's one place I'd love to live, but because it's so huge, you've got everything there. But whereabouts are you in America?
Yeah, so I live in the state of Utah, which is on the west side of the country. It's just a couple of states in from the coast, so we're landlocked. But unfortunately, but we it's a beautiful state. You said you've been a couple of times. Have you ever been to Utah?
I have driven through. I've just had a look on the map to try and kind of get where you are, and I have gone through Death Valley. So I've been to Las Vegas, and then we
Okay.
drove up through Death Valley to Yosemite, and then we did the Big Sur and went all the way down to San Diego. So we have
Wow.
that, and I've been to San Diego a couple of times as well,
Okay.
and San
Yeah,
Francisco.
San Diego's beautiful. So yeah, you were just probably south of where I live. I live just just a little bit south of Salt Lake City, which is the capital of Utah, and it's a beautiful state. Up here in the city where we live is big giant mountains that everybody will hike or snowboard or ski, stuff to do all year long, and it's really nice and close. I mean, you could go skiing or snowboarding or whatever within half an hour of everybody's houses. And then the
No.
southern part of the state is there's five national parks in Utah. And so
Wow.
everybody does hiking and canyoneering and rock climbing and all sorts of stuff. So it's a really beautiful state actually.
How be interesting wildlife as well. Do you have
Yeah,
bears?
we do have some good wildlife. It's like I said up north, it's all mountains, so there's forests and of course deer and elk and moose and all that kind of fun stuff. And then as you get to southern Utah, where all the national parks are, it switches to more deserty, so all the desert animals, lizards, and coyotes and fox and stuff like that.
Mhm. Do you have cats, the big mountain cats?
Yeah, we do. We do definitely have those mountain lions. We have, or cougars. They go by either name, but yeah, we have a few of those.
Yeah, quite vicious. I've seen some YouTubes of them going for it with some locals.
Yeah, fortunately, most of the time they stay up in the mountain ranges, but because we're so close, a lot of times we will find one that kind of ventures down into the area, and they have to bring animal control down to to tranquilize it and take it back to where it needs to live. So
That's amazing. It's so
yeah.
boring over here in comparison. And can you tell us a bit about mental health services and kind of just
Yeah,
us a bit about it? It'd be great to know.
yeah. So over here in America, we really have two systems. We have a public system and a private system, which I think you guys would be familiar with over there. Maybe ours is just a little bit switched from yours. Our private system is significantly bigger. So people will go get mental health services. Either they'll pay, by themselves, or sometimes their insurance might cover certain things, but not very often. A lot of times, insurance doesn't cover mental health services, unfortunately, and that's the private side. And then we have our public side, and that one is mostly for people who qualify to have those services. And usually, you don't qualify unless you're not making a whole lot of money. You kind of need some extra social supports and things. Um, Once you hit a certain amount that you're making each year, you no longer qualify for those services, and you have to go to the private sector.
And how
Um,
do most people fall in that? Is there a kind of a messy middle where people don't quite qualify or?
yeah, absolutely. So it feels like kind of like a broken system, in all honesty, because if you're not making very much money, you can get some pretty good services
Mm.
in terms of mental health side of things. But unfortunately, life is also really difficult because you're not making a lot of money, and that's hard to survive. And then you pass the certain point where you no longer qualify for all of those really great services, but you're still not making very much money. So life is still really tough, but you've also now lost all your services. And so it's like, do I want to hit this barrier that I'm going to lose everything? I'm going to make a little bit more money, but I'm going to lose all my supports. And then if you can trudge through that and get to, like where you're making a little bit more money at the top, then you can afford the private insurance. And again, like I said earlier, sometimes that will help pay for stuff, and sometimes it won't.
Mm.
So it's kind of a weird catch-22 system. Like most people are up here that they don't qualify for the services at all.
Right.
Um, but it does leave like our middle class people without access to mental health care.
And what's the demand like over there? Is there high demand?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty high. It's really hard to tell because um, it's because everybody's on the private side, so there's not like
Mm.
a wait list that I can say everybody would go on a certain wait list, because there's so many different insurances, and some people are paying cash, and there's agencies all over. So some agencies might have wait lists, but others might not. But the demand is really, really high, mostly for kids. Therapists that work with kids, that's probably the biggest demand. But then the other demand is mostly just there because, again, people can't. Unfortunately, when you start making enough money that you no longer qualify for the social services, the free insurance, the public health insurance, um, you can't really afford therapy on your own. It's just too expensive for the vast majority of people. So they either go without or have to sacrifice somewhere to get it.
Gosh, it's really tricky, isn't it? And you've started doing some work with Richard, and he's in the UK training to be a counsellor. How
Yeah.
did that come about? And I know that one of the interests you both have is discussing the differences between the UK and the US.
Yeah, so that was kind of fun. Both Richard Campbell and I were writing articles on Substack, and we were both pretty new into it. I feel like we both started writing articles roughly about the same time, and somehow I came across his Substack. Both of them had somewhat the same type of mentality and the same idea, and I think that's kind of what attracted me to reading his. And um, basically their personal stories of whatever we're going through in life, and maybe have some therapeutic idea behind it, or therapeutic twist, or something just to connect to trying to build positive mental health in this messy life, essentially.
Mm.
And I'm a licensed therapist here in Utah, and Richard is working on his his degree and his education to become a counselor over there in the UK. And through us both writing these Substacks, we were talking a little bit here and there, just on each other's posts, nothing too serious. And I had been thinking about starting a podcast for a little while, and had no experience doing it, and didn't even know where to start, where to begin, anything. And I just decided to ask Rich if he would have any interest in that. And I really loved the dynamic of some of the questions that he was asking, and just the way that he was able to think about life. And so he said, "Why not? Let's give it a try." And so our friendship was born, and we went from there.
Oh, and have you learned anything about therapists in the UK from that work, or has anything surprised you? Have you noticed any differences?
Yeah, that's what's been really fun, is him and I have been able to really, as we built this podcast and talked through Substack, we've really been able to talk about differences between the two countries, and it's been really, really fun. One of the things that we talked about one time on our podcast was that you don't have to be licensed in the UK to call yourself a therapist. I had actually learned about that on another podcast that I was listening to, and I read a little bit about it and found it interesting. And so I decided that it would be fun for him and I to talk about it.
Mm.
And it still really surprises me. I mean, I don't fully understand how the UK public system works. I know that you guys can get, I don't know if it's licensed or accredited or something, with a bunch of different boards, and that makes it more professional. But just the idea that, anybody on the street can say, "I'm a therapist," and charge for it, whether they're accredited or not, is new and interesting. And that's fascinating to me, because if you did that here in America, It's against the law. You would be charged with a misdemeanor
As
and
it should be.
consequence.
It's scary because it's people that are really vulnerable, isn't it? That and the amount of accreditations and qualifications that are around for therapists is so I'm confused and I've been doing it a long time.
Okay,
Richard has
good to
been,
hear.
yeah, it is so confusing. And, I'm BABCP accredited CBT therapist, and that's very important, that accreditation. I do a lot of work every year to maintain that accreditation, but generally people don't know what it means. And people will say on their websites they do CBT, but they might have just done a couple of hours training where it
Yeah.
takes average about 8 years to train over here to be
Wow.
accredited. Yeah.
Yeah, I just find that really interesting. And
Mm.
I mean, it sounds to me, and you would know better than I would, but it sounds to me like the UK is growing in this field, and maybe that will come one day to where it's maybe a little bit more regulated, which would be good.
Hope
I
so.
don't know. And you tell me. I don't know if it's just somebody on the street, if they wanted to have mental health services, if they just started looking up, I want to go to a therapist. My guess is they probably wouldn't know what any of those accreditations are, or even that it's needed.
No, and ideally we recommend that everybody goes to their GP
Okay.
first off to kind of get advice from the GP, but the GPs can be very limited in their knowledge around mental health and what
Mm,
therapy is out there. So they generally just recommend CBT, and it's not a one size fits all thing, really. Not everybody's right for CBT. There's lots
sure.
of, we're all very unique, and there's lots of different therapies that suit each people differently. So yeah, but that's what we recommend everybody starts with, and generally a GP can start to point people in the right direction. And then different therapists websites, I suppose, are trying to work at educating people and trying to help people understand and kind of make the best decision around a therapist. But you need to do some heavy checks, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So hopefully it will continue to grow. It sounds like it's headed in the right direction.
Yeah, everything takes so long to change over here, though, so it'll probably be another 50 years before there's any serious rumblings. And one
Yeah.
of the things I've heard about kind of therapy in America is, and I don't know if this is a myth, so it'd be really interesting to have your take on it, is that like everybody has a therapist. It's very on trend. And when you have therapy, you have a therapist forever, really, that you just kind of have a therapist that you see once a week. Or I was listening to a podcast with, I don't know if you know Andrew Huberman. He's
I know the name, but I don't know. I wouldn't be able to tell you who it is.
he's really fascinating. He's a neuro scientist in Stanford, and he runs a podcast called the Huberman Lab, and it's all neuroscience. But he was saying that he sees a psychoanalyst 3 times a week and has done for years. So,
Mm.
am I right in that, or is that a bit of a
Um, so unfortunately, no, I don't think that myth is accurate. Um, Different states over here maybe are a little bit more progressive with mental health than others. So, for instance, like the state of California, my understanding of that state, just from a little, I've never worked over there or even lived over there, but my understanding from just a little bit of study and things is that would fit the myth a little bit closer to what you're talking about. Is more people are very open about mental health, more people are willing and open about going to a therapist and okay having a therapist. I don't know if it would still hit the majority, but I definitely know that it's much more comfortable over there.
Mm.
Where I live, it's still very much a stigma. It's still very much people are in some ways afraid to say if they're going to therapy. Um, I think not everybody, of course, right? But it's still very much kind of taboo and like untalked about. It's almost still looked at like you only go to therapy if there's something wrong with you or if you have a problem, rather than just living normal life and everyday things and dealing with stressors and anxieties and things that we all deal with. It still has the stigma that it's like I don't go to therapy unless there's something really wrong with me. And
Mm.
I do think it's slowly changing, but it's definitely still there.
Yeah, I'm seeing it change in my practice. I've been doing my practice for 10 years, and I'm slowly seeing people come and say, I just want to be the best version of myself. I just want to understand my mind. So not necessarily in kind of any crisis. So,
Yeah.
and I'm really interested in why people choose their careers, especially if you're somewhere where it's kind of quite taboo and stuff and not really talked about. How did you kind of arrive at being a therapist?
I wish that I had like a really amazing, fun answer for this. But
Um,
I think that
I feel it.
I think that a lot of people, at least here, maybe kind of fall into it a little bit. I don't know that it's super planned or anything massive happens. I was actually in the business field for a while, doing some business and sales and things, and I kept trying to convince myself that that's where I wanted to be. Because there's certain benefits that sounded great, but after quite a few years, I felt like I was still trying to convince myself, and eventually I was able to listen to that inner self. And if I'm still trying to fit in here, maybe I'm going about it the wrong way, and maybe I need to explore some other things. So I ended up taking a few different like aptitude and personality tests to figure out like what field would best fit me and who I am. And on
Mm,
each of those tests, the field of social work kept coming up.
mm,
And that was naive. I was naive. That was so new to me. I didn't even know what social work was. So I set off on this adventure of researching what social work was and what it entailed and what you could do with social work, and ended up taking an introduction to social work class at our local university here, and fell in love quickly. And so I guess these personality or aptitude tests were accurate.
mm,
And I got my bachelor's degree in social work, and then I started working in child welfare. So working with families who were struggling and maybe their kids would have to be removed and come into state's custody, or trying to preserve families who were on the verge of having kids removed because of abuse or neglect.
that must have been so
And
fun.
yeah, it was a really hard field, but I loved it, because I built some really strong relationships there. I felt like I was really engaged in the field.
Mm,
Uh, but I still had this drive to keep going in my education, to be more invested in families than just in the child welfare system. And so I went back to school, got my master's in social work, and worked on becoming a therapist of that way. So it was kind of like this backdoor route to get here. Um, but I couldn't be happier, and I love the whole field of social work and therapy.
And what type of therapy do you mainly deliver? What's your specialism?
So I consider myself a generalist.
Mm,
I've taken various courses in CBT and some family therapy stuff with the Gottmans, um, and done that very basic coursework. But I've decided for myself that I like to look at things with a broad lens, and I feel like if I spent, like you said, all these years going down one particular path, and money for trainings and things, just the way that my mind works, I know that I would start seeing a lot of clients in that framework. And I really enjoy being able to see and practice different frameworks. And so I will implement various interventions or things with whatever I feel like the client might need at that time, which can range from maybe CBT practices, or maybe alter that to some ACT practices, or um, for whatever reason, I kind of like narrative therapy as well. And so I'll use some interventions with narrative therapy, and I'll just kind of interweave them throughout, depending on how the session is going or whatever I feel like the client needs. Or maybe if we're having discussions and I can ask them like, do you feel like this is serving you? Are you connecting to these skills and these things that we're talking about? And if they are, we'll keep going that path. If not, then I'll try and switch it up the best that I
yeah,
can.
yeah. So working together collaboratively and checking in all the time. Do you work with any specific conditions or presentations? Have you?
Yeah, so I work at an agency that kind of considers themselves a one-stop shop,
Mhm.
and we see clients in all various situations. So I currently I have clients who are coming in for depression and anxiety. I have clients that are coming in for addictions. Primarily pornography addictions is a big one at our agency. We have had some substance use addictions, but not as many as pornography addictions.
Why do you think
I have
that is? Why do you think that is? Does it culturally or?
That's a really good question. I think that a lot of times there's specific agencies that focus on substance use stuff, and I think that clients who find themselves addicted to substances go to those agencies. They're more well known,
Yeah.
and a lot of them are more in that public health system that I kind of talked about.
Mm,
A lot of the clients might qualify for that, and so they might naturally be able to go to there, or it's really, really high end ones
mm.
that the average person can't afford. um, and I think that pornography is, I mean, I live in a state where I think I believe that we are one of the higher states in pornography use in general. And I think a lot of that is just due to the demographics of where we live. It's a very religious area, and um,
So
I
you'd
think that
expect it, in my mind, to go down then. They, but it
yeah,
actually increases.
on the surface you would think that would help it to go down, but I think that it also causes a lot of stress and a lot of worry and a lot of trying to keep up a public image and a lot of shame, which all of these things are difficult, right? And
Yeah.
they're hard to deal with, and so people need outlets, places, and I think it just serves as an outlet. I think it's an escape from the realities of stress and anxiety and shame and approval and acceptance, and it's an easy outlet that is, I think at the beginning maybe it feels less dangerous than substance use, right? But then people find themselves in a place where they may not be able to control the how
Yeah,
much they're viewing it or any of that kind of stuff. So
makes a lot of sense. And what do you find most rewarding about your work, the work that you do?
I, what I love the most about doing therapy is that we get to connect with people
Mm.
on such a deep level.
It's such an
Um,
honor, isn't it, and a privilege
Oh,
to
it really
be
is. When
allowed
people
into
open up, yeah,
that.
when people open up and share things with you, and when they say something like, "I've never told anybody this," and then they proceed to tell you, it is an honor, and it's really nice that we can build an environment where they feel safe enough to share the things that they fear the most about
Mm.
themselves, and be able to sit with them with that fear and let them know that you're still human.
Mm.
You're still alive. You're still okay. Like we don't have to say that this is wrong with you. It's called living life, and we're here to work through that. I don't think you get that outside of a therapy room very often.
Mm.
And so that feeling of that connection and that genuineness is probably what I value the most.
Yeah. And if you could go back in time and kind of talk to the younger version of yourself that was starting this journey from sales, quite similar to what Richard has been doing, isn't it? Into
Yeah.
a therapist and social work. Is there any advice you would have given yourself as a younger trainee or just starting out?
Um, First off, I would have said start sooner, jump in sooner, get going on this path that you're going to find rewarding and wonderful. But as I got into it, I noticed that because I was coming from the business world, I was still very much in a achievement based, um,
Mm,
approval based mindset, and so maybe even like problem solving mindset. So when I first start sitting with clients, I would notice that as they were sharing things, my mind was going 100 miles an hour,
mm,
and I would be trying to think about what I can say that's going to solve their problem, right? I was still very much in the stigma of that somebody's coming in with a problem that has to be fixed.
mm,
And I think that's part of just growing up in this society that we're in, where they look at therapy as a problem. Still think that I had some of those preconceived notions still built in. And then also because I came from a world where you have to get results, you have to do things quickly, you have to make money, you have to do all of these things. And I would tell myself that it's not about achievement. It's not about results in terms of, it's about results in helping clients and helping them to learn how to live their life in healthier ways. But it's not like I have to say the perfect thing to fix this problem right away. It's more about self-exploration and the journey and building connections and managing emotions, like lifelong stuff, not something that's just going to end. I would have told myself to have patience and begin to
Oh,
process that.
I would have really needed to hear that as well. There's a lot it takes you, and especially because I trained as a counselor and then did CBT training, so that kind of pushes you down that kind of fix it, solution
Very
focus,
much so.
and then that's probably why I've moved more to compassion focused therapy, which does things differently. But there's a lot of magic in the silences and the spaces, isn't there, and just the therapeutic relationship and slowing down. That's all the trainee therapists I work with.
Yeah, I think you said that exactly right. It's beautiful space. And at
Mm.
first, when we're first starting out, it's uncomfortable space, right? Those awkward silences, like we don't know how to deal with them. Customers or patients or clients, whatever we call them, they don't know how to deal with them. It's weird and uncomfortable. But now I relish them. Now I look forward to them. And I encourage people to sit with them. And because I think that's really where a lot of the work actually begins,
Yeah.
is in that silent moment.
Yeah. And have you had therapy yourself? Have you been the other side of the chair?
Yeah, definitely. I've gone a few different times. I would say that I don't go on a regular basis, but I do go when I notice that I need some assistance on maybe reprocessing some things or working through some challenges that I might be having, and so then I'll go at those times. But yeah, I've been for various things, different anxieties, maybe relationship struggles, maybe some past traumatic events that may come up every once in a while that I've either forgotten about and now they're coming back up, or maybe I just haven't had to figure out how to deal with them yet. Yeah, I enjoy going.
Mm.
It's a good reminder for me because even though I have gone to therapy and I am a therapist, every time I go back in, um, I feel that fear of walking into a therapy room. Of
Terrifying. I don't know how
It's
we have it.
terrifying.
Terrifying.
Yeah, it's a good reminder for what clients feel and what they experience coming in to see us. But it is, like all the fear of walking in and like the feeling like I have to have all my thoughts organized and I have to be able to present in a way that this therapist is gonna A, think this is valuable, but B, think that there's something that we can work on. Like all these pressures that we put on ourselves, and they all just seem to come out as you're driving to a therapy appointment. And it's a good reminder, but it's also really healthy to let all that out.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a huge advocate for that. And what's 2024 gonna bring for you? What are your plans and what are your plans with your Substack and everything you're doing?
I love that you're asking that because in all honesty, I don't think I had asked myself that until you sent these questions over to help prepare me. And I love that it's coming up for me now that we're only 2 weeks away from 2024. Um, so I mentioned that podcast that Rich and I are on. I think for me, I really want to put more time and energy and effort into that podcast. It just started at the end of the year. I'd really like to see
Mm.
where we could grow that and see how many people we can reach. So that will be a main focus of mine. As far as Substack goes, I just wrote another article
Oh.
earlier this week. I hadn't written for 2 months because we had been so focused on the podcast. So I just wrote another article earlier this week, kind of talking about how I've neglected the Substack and I missed it. And so I'd really like to re-engage back in that as well. I think that was building a really fun community. It was also serving as a really good outlet for just everyday life situations. So I'd like to grow that a little bit. And
Mm.
then just continuing my journey in my professional career and my path and growth as a professional, but also as an individual. And none of these goals are checkbox goals. They're nothing like I'm necessarily looking at the end of the year saying I did that or I didn't that, but um, I, I I I believe in living by the values that you want to live by, and part of my values is, living the journey, um, trying to look for extra experiences in life.
Mm.
And I think these goals kind of fall into those values without having, again, I talked about it's not achievement based
Yeah.
necessarily. I'm not looking for certain numbers, but I'm trying to enjoy the ride as it goes, knowing that this is where I want to improve.
And I think that's where the magic happens again, and you're not tying yourself down to anything. You're just going to enjoy the journey and let it evolve and then journey, the kind of path shows you the way sometimes, doesn't it, when you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a few years ago, if you would have said that, I'm doing these things that I'm doing now, it wasn't even a thought in my mind. And so I do love that, is let the journey kind of take you where it takes you.
Yeah, yeah. And how often are you going to be releasing the podcast
Well,
thing?
right now it comes out every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I think that's been okay. Both Rich and I are pretty busy. He's got a full-time job and he's going to school, and then we're doing this podcast. And then I also have a full-time job. My I do therapy on the side. And so that's not even my full-time job. And so I have a full-time job and then therapy and then the podcast. And so 2 weeks has been sustainable for us.
Mm.
Um, but I'm so excited about it that I sometimes I wish that we were doing it weekly. I just want to keep going and going. So right now it's every other, but if anything changes, we'll do it weekly.
Fantastic. I look forward to sharing that. And if people want to follow your journey, can you tell us where people can look and where you're most visible?
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast is called Everyday Therapist, and it's on all podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of those. So it's called Everyday Therapist. And then my Substack is called Embrace Humanity, and you could follow me on Substack as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
our conversation. Your lovely, settling demeanour. So I feel nice and calm after our conversation. Really enjoyed getting to know you more and hearing more about the work you do and more about Utah as well. It's fascinating. So thank you.
absolutely, Sarah. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.
Take care.